I want to talk to you a little bit about AEW, but before we do, I want to ask you about Ring of Honor because as you and our folks are listening to this weekend is the next big Ring of Honor pay per view. And I've said it many times here before on the show that I feel like AEW over delivers on pay per view. I feel like they really are at their best at super serving their audience on pay per view. Ring of Honor has their next big offering this weekend. And as we're recording, about 1,000 tickets have been sold. And I'm curious, let me just run through the matches right fast. We got Dalton Castle versus Commander versus Kyle Fletcher versus Lee Johnson versus Lee Moriarty versus TBD. It's the survival of the fittest finals for the vacant ROH television championship that Samoa Joe forfeited. We got Keith Lee taking on Shane Taylor, an I Quit match with Tony Nese and Ethan Page. Glad to see Ethan on TV again. FTR is going to be teaming with Mark Briscoe, taking on the Blackpool Combat Club with Bryan Danielson, John Moxley, and Claudio Castagnoli. So they've really loaded that one up. And we've got Athena and Billy Starks. So it's a Ring of Honor pay-per-view with some guys who've been on big-time shows. I mean, Bryan Danielson has main evented WrestleMania on more than one occasion. And we know John Moxley, as Dean Ambrose, was a superstar in WWE and obviously one of the first big surprise talents and really carried a lot of the load here for AEW. But for whatever reason, it's a pay-per-view that's only sold 1,000 tickets. And I think a lot of people are wondering, hey, what is the shot in the arm for Ring of Honor? Do you have a opinion or thought process about how do we get more, I don't know, interest in the Ring of Honor brand?
No. It was a bad decision to bring it. It was a bad decision to buy it in the first place. And there's nothing anybody's going to do to make it interesting or important outside of the hardest of hardcore internet wrestling community fans. That's it. There is no solution. If it was a horse, I'd put it out of its misery and move on. I would take the resources that are going into Ring of Honor, which is never going to be viable ever. I would take the resources that are being dumped into that and put it into my core product, my Dynamite. By putting Bryan Danielson and the rest of the people that they put into this thing, you're diluting their characters. You're making them look like independent wrestlers. You're not elevating their characters in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you're doing exactly the opposite. It's really unbelievable to me. And I don't know what the drive is. Is it ego? Is Tony just said, I did this and I'm going to prove I can make it work? It's certainly not because it's a great revenue opportunity. It dilutes the core product. It's being shoved down the audience's throat, and they're gagging on it. They're gagging on it. AEW did what, 850,000 viewers with Christian and Edge last week after they did their best to build it up, and that's all you can bring in. You got to ask yourself why. It's a really powerful word. Why aren't fans spending more time with the AEW product? Why is Dynamite unable to break 1 million viewers more than once or twice or 3 times a year? What is it about this brand? It's the product. It's the way characters are being developed or not being developed. It's focus, it's vision, it's a lot of things. But Ring of Honor is just a distraction, and it dilutes the core business. It dilutes the characters that are part of it. It's almost embarrassing to me that it's happening. I don't understand it at all. I hope it works. I hope so. I hope a year from now you can go back. Remember when you said, and I'd have to admit that I was wrong. But so far, when it comes to AEW, I've been right far more often than I've been wrong. And for 2 years, is focus on the core product, focus on Dynamite, not all these other shows. You don't have the creative infrastructure or a formula or a vision that's working. So if you don't have a formula or a vision that's working and you don't see any kind of upward growth in your product, why would you expand it? And I don't want to hear about the money because I hear Dave Meltzer talking about, AEW's gross, all this. Gross doesn't mean shit. You know that, Conrad. I don't care what a company's gross revenues are. That's such horse shit. Net revenues, yeah. Let's talk about, EBITDA, earnings before interest, depreciation, whatever the hell it is. Let's talk about those numbers, but you're never going to hear about those numbers from Dave Meltzer, right? He's going to talk about the gross numbers. And Tony Khan's going to talk about the gross numbers. They can't possibly be making money. They can't possibly be making. How's that video game doing, by the way? Have you heard? Yeah, neither have I. Neither is anybody else. It's focus on the core product. Get your foundation underneath you. It's like Tony Khan's trying to build a mansion on sand with no foundation. Find the right property. Find the right terra firma. Find solid ground. Build a solid foundation, and then build your house. Tony's trying to build a mansion, and he hasn't put the basement in yet, or he hasn't put the foundation in yet. It's crazy to me, but whatever. Hey, he's got all the money in the world, so I guess it doesn't matter. But it does matter to the talent that participate in it, because their lights are being diminished. There's the shine on their stars are being dulled by being involved in things like Ring of Honor. Bryan Danielson and Ring of Honor, excuse me. You so often you hear the fan base, the internet wrestling fan base, talking about how someone is used right or not used right. Here you got a whole collection of top tier talent.
Yeah.
That are recognizable, have just about anywhere in the world to wrestling fans, and you're putting them on Ring of Honor. And by the way, you sold 1,000 tickets. What does that tell you? Or more importantly, what should that tell you?
Well, do you think it's a chicken and the egg deal? I mean, do you think it's one of those deals where he thinks if I load it up with enough star power and get enough attention to it, then I can perhaps leverage that to create a new television opportunity? I mean,
if that's his, then he's not that smart. I've often, conceded that Tony Khan's probably much smarter than I am in a lot of different ways. But in terms of business strategy, wrestling business strategy, if that is Tony's thinking, then he's more inadequate than I thought he was.
Well, let's say Ring of Honor was going to be the AEW answer for NXT. How do you launch an NXT?
Keep it separate. Keep it separate. Don't cross over. My God, he's got enough talent, right? Keep it separate. Two different companies. Treat it as two different companies. Don't have your Ring of Honor titles being defended on Dynamite. You're diluting your own product. It's insanity. There is no example in history of that working. And it's certainly not working in the present. Neither one of those two brands, Ring of Honor or Dynamite, are benefiting from it. It's been going on now for a year and a half?
Yeah.
It ain't working. Just wake up, have a cup of coffee, put your glasses on, look at the numbers and go, it's not working. And it hasn't been working for a long time. There's nothing to indicate that it may work in the future. Why in the world would you keep doing it if it's not for your ego? I would treat them separate. To answer your question, absolutely treat them separately. Just like WWE did, I think, for a long time. There wasn't a lot of crossover between NXT and the main roster. If you got called up, that was a big damn deal. Yes. And there was a lot of chatter about it. But up until recently, you didn't see a lot of crossover between the two for many, many years.
But I would argue that crossover is what helped land them the new deal with CW for allegedly more money. Like, isn't that part of the formula? Like, get stars on that program and then people will pay more money for it?
No. They're not going to just pay more money because they're stars on the program. Do you think program executives are fucking wrestling marks that are sitting around, on Reddit talking about wrestling? They don't care. What they care about is growth and performance. That's what they care about.
Stars are what do that, Eric, right?
Stars are a part of what do that, but building that brand on its own, so that NXT had its own idea. How many years has NXT been on television before there was any crossover? And there was growth. It was a separate entity and was treated as such. Build the foundation and then bring your big stars over and do some crossover. But
Well,
you've
the
got
reality is, I don't mean to cut you off, but NXT did not just grow. Like they went on TV, it was a big competition. They were in a big lull. They sort of reimagined the look and feel of the show. That got a tepid response, and then they started dripping stars over. And you started to see guys like CM Punk and guys like John Cena and guys like The Undertaker, and then really extended runs with ladies like Becky Lynch, big stars, the man. And they've enjoyed their best ratings ever from having established stars from the other big brand on that program. Like to me, that seems to be the formula that got them with CW in this bigger deal.
Sure. And everything that you just said absolutely happened within the last 8 months.
Yes.
It didn't happen right away. Ring of Honor immediately became a part of the Dynamite show before the brand was ever really established outside the fistful of internet wrestling fans that love it. You have to establish the brand first. You have to give it its own identity. Let it become something different than the core product. If you would have gone back when NXT first started and started having the crossover and talent jumping back and forth right off the bat, I don't think we'd be talking about CW or NXT because it would have hurt the core product and therefore would have come to an end. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm not saying if you agree with it, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. You have to build the brand. It has to stand on its own. It has to perform on its own without diluting the core product. Right now, Ring of Honor is like a giant freaking parasite on the AEW brand. And the more focus they put on the parasite, the more that parasite is going to diminish or harm the core brand.